miners has changed from just being a Bitcoin play for traditional investors to actually become energy powerhouse. They are very important for building this resilient energy infrastructure for the future. So do you think analysts and investors are actually now grasping that, are understanding the role the miners are playing? They are not just the Bitcoin play.
I don't really think so to the degree that you would expect, but I think it will evolve, like adoption of Bitcoin around the world. It will evolve, and we're in a very still early innings of that evolution. Over the next 4 years, it will be a game changer. I think that we're witnessing a phenomenon that President-to-be Trump was just in France, and Elon Musk was with them on the whole AI world. And then all of a sudden he flies back to South Texas, watch the launch of rockets going into space by Elon. This is a new world. I hope that this wakes up what's taking place in Europe of the far left.
Why you decided since the beginning to be focused on green energy? Welcome to the Financial Fox. Our Christmas edition video interview is going to be great because on the show I have Frank Holmes.
Frank is an early investor in crypto, a philanthropist, CEO of asset manager US Global Investor, and executive chairman of Hive. On Twitter, he goes by the handle Bulldog Holmes.
If you are watching, please take a moment now to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow Financial Fox on social media if you haven't done so already. You will find all the links in the description. Remember, your support is crucial to grow the channel so we can educate more people about crypto. With that being said, let's get to the interview.
Frank, welcome to the show.
It's lovely to be with you, and ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Why the bulldog?
Just want to be happy.
Okay, so the bulldog is a happy animal, I would say.
The bulldog is because I played a lot of sports in high school, and the mascot was bulldog. I don't think my face looks like Winston Churchill as the bulldog, but it came from being so tenacious.
Yeah, I have a French bulldog, so I understand. Yes, very tenacious as well. Yeah, resilient and always fighting. That's the key.
Before we dive into today's interview, I'd like to introduce you to our partner, Hive Digital Technologies, a publicly listed company building the next generation data center infrastructure with 100% renewable energy. Hive was the first crypto miner to go public and the first one to have an AI strategy. With over 2,600 Bitcoin on their balance sheet and operations in Canada, Sweden, Paraguay, Hive is fully committed to transforming communities, rebalancing the energy grid, and delivering value to shareholders with a low dilution and cash-focused approach. If you don't know Hive, check them out at hivedigitaltechnologies.com.
So I've got loads of questions for you, and I thought perhaps we could start with a simple one. When did you get orange pill?
I got the orange pill in early 2016. I was trying to launch as a money manager a Bitcoin ETF, and I was able to sort of grasp the similarities between the world of gold and Bitcoin, and I recognized that they both read from the same Old Testament of economic models of governments will slowly race to destroy the value of fiat. And now I was entering into a digital realm. I'm known for the world of gold. I've written books on gold. I have 100,000 followers every week from 80 countries on my thoughts on the world of gold. So it was an interesting transition taking the orange pill, but it was really validated when I went to Consensus in 2016 and I saw Abigail Johnson, the CEO of Fidelity, who is a tech analyst, given the keynote speech and saying that she'd been mining in Bitcoin in Quebec. And I said, heck, something big is happening outside of my investment world of global investing. I had the first Eastern European fund that went from $4 million to $1.4 billion as the EU was being formed. I was first to be in the China region, gold funds. Now I have this JETS ETF. Now I'm going into the Bitcoin realm. And here we have Abigail Johnson. She doesn't speak at investment conference, but she's at a crypto event. that was the epiphany.
Wow. Yes, super interesting. And I know that you are a gold proponent. So many people obviously describe, or let's say Bitcoin is described as a digital gold. What do you think is the biggest misconception about it?
It's tangible. The world of gold has always been tangible. And what's interesting for me is that Indian women wear 6 times the amount of gold that's in Fort Knox in the U.S., and that has the most gold in the world as a country.
Yeah.
And they wear it as bangles and jewelry. So their wealth is portable, but they wear it. And if there's some crisis, they can take off a bangle and go to the hospital and pay for it. So that is, to me, was the most interesting difference. And 60% of gold is love. It is given for love. It's led for wedding season. It's for, in Asia, in particular, it's the year that you were born. The sort of like the zodiac cycle comes back from shamanism. And then if you're the year of the dragon, and you would get a little gold dragon, pure gold. And if you're a really rich family, they give you a big gold dragon. And if you're the tiger, you got a gold tiger. So every 12 years, you've got some type of a piece of gold. And it's a very important part of the underlying demand. And the demand for gold is more correlated to rising GDP per capita. 40% of gold's demand is fear of currency, fear of devaluing of a currency. But I would say that 99% of Bitcoin is fear that your freedom of rights are taken away, that your wealth is oppressed by a government, like in 2002, what Argentina did, that it confiscated everyone's money market funds, took all their US dollars away, gave them for every $10,000, $3,000 worth of pesos, which today are worth about 30 cents. This is oppressive. So Bitcoin is much more on the fear element than there is about love. But what I did see about gold, and I did see regarding Bitcoin, where there's love, is the ordinal market. Because when you take a unique Satoshi number and you attach it to a digital image you love, you create this energetic digital wealth that's portable around the world. So that was the first sort of where I saw this element of people sharing a photograph or something of that nature. So I think that the Bitcoin world will evolve where it's both gold and love.
It's the first time that I hear something like that, and I think it's great. The best comparison between Bitcoin and gold, and the best description as well. And it's really true. Okay, well, let's move to Hive. That I know is it's not your latest baby, but it's kind of like the biggest baby that you are growing. So tell me how everything started.
Well, I was trying to launch another ETF, a Bitcoin ETF in 2000, and realized it wasn't going to go anywhere. And it didn't until this year. It wasn't going to go anywhere because the SEC and the Canadian Securities Commissions, I went to see both, really caught up with AML and KYC to prevent something happening as an ETF format. But I realized that if you're a Bitcoin miner, then you mine the original Bitcoin. You create the Genesis coin, or really after the first coins were Genesis, but then become the virgin coins every 10 minutes. If you win that lottery, almost like with your ASIC chips, you get these virgin coins. Have never been in cybersecurity. They've never been in a dark world. So they have this unique valuation, and it's all transparent. And so I thought, well, look at if I was in the Bitcoin mining. So I went out and at that stage bought some Ethereum, some GPU chips, and with my own data center here, started mining some Ethereum to try to learn it. And people contacted me regarding the creation of Hive. And I said, I became the co-founder. I put up the first 5 million institutional money, and immediately 25 million came behind it. It went public. It was a darling. Fidelity in Canada were marvelous. They gave us $100 million. We raised $200 million in between September 2017 and December. And we started building out mining Ethereum. In Iceland was the original start, and then it was Sweden. And then we got into Bitcoin mining. And there's many firsts that Hive has done. We stay focused on being green only. I'm known, as I said earlier, about the world of gold. I took the first gold royalty company, which is the biggest in the world, Franco-Nevada, public, 1983. And I respect, I was so young, I really didn't realize what I was involved with the creation. but the model of a royalty company is high revenue per employee. So Hive has always had the highest revenue per employee of the crypto mining companies. So when we went public, immediately Riot went in the US, Hut 8 from the same brokerage firm that took us public. They were created to try to emulate and copy what we had done. And so there was just lots of this enthusiasm. And we saw Novacrats came to Canada to launch his company. Galaxy was launched in Canada before coming back to the US on the success of Hive. So Hive has had many firsts. You know, we're the first to balance the grid. That's the largest source of profit margin for Riot in Texas. We've been doing it for over 4 years in Sweden. We're first to really do a chip, our own with Intel, and we're green only energy we've sourced so far. We've done, the other part was recycling of energy, where we heat a building 40,000 square feet in Montreal to heat a building 200,000 square feet that has 175 manufacturing workers there making whirlpools in Quebec. And the same electrical molecule. Now that's being done in Finland. It's being done in other places. So I really been thrilled about my learning curve as an older gold millennial, baby boomer investing. I now feel like I'm generation X, Y, and Z of trying to stay up with this new ecosystem.
Why you decided since the beginning to be focused on green energy? Why ESG has been so important since the beginning?
Well, there's a trend as an investor running mutual funds and ETFs. There was a big push, and it's got pushed back now by coming out of the UK and then with the SEC on ESG disclosure. Gold mining companies have always done this. They've always been very conscientious. When you're in Latin America, most of those geologists come from Canada. They go back to a beautiful world. They see the poverty. You know what they do? They first start building hospitals and schools within their mining community. They do everything of the highest end of recycling water. They've already been doing this ESG concept that I have experienced for 30 years, and it's only grown. I said that if we should stay focused on this sort of strategy of being involved with our community. In Boden, Sweden, we sponsor the hockey arena. We sponsor 12 children teams playing. We also sponsor gaming, or funding for education in that community. That sort of that overall ESG. And the idea of using hydro renewable energy was just, I think, comes from my money management. Now in the US, a lot of funds don't really care. They don't care about the ESG. They don't really care about that you're using green. But it's been very important to companies like NVIDIA. Intel reached out to us to create a chip for their Bitcoin mining chip. And it was because we're green only. So it has helped us in getting NVIDIA chips that allowed us to not only mine Ethereum, but be able to go and also be involved in AI, whereas Hut 8 could only buy NVIDIA chips that could only mine Ethereum. They weren't given that latitude. They weren't green only. We were. We are.
So you mentioned a few things that Hive is focused on. If you have to summarize in 3 key points why Hive is different from competitors and peers, what would you say?
I would say that our models to be like a gold royalty company. So what does that mean? I mentioned earlier about the royalty model. Nevada does $30 million of revenue per employee. It has the royalties on Barrick and Newmont's assets in Nevada, and they do $600,000 of revenue per employee. So when you have high revenue per employee, you're able to do with meltdowns in Bitcoin. Hive has always had operating income with every meltdown. Our peers went bankrupt when between Celsius and FTX blow up. And even though Ethereum went from proof of stake to proof of work to proof of stake, we still made money. And it's because we have this discipline, this financial model. So when we look at NVIDIA, they do about $3.5 million of revenue per employee. Apple does $2.5 million of revenue per employee, and Hive does $6 million. So it's been that discipline. And when we look at other operations, they have many more employees than what we have.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And I sometimes I think the market doesn't really understand that because Hive is such a great company and it's still undervalued. So what do you think are the factors that investors are missing?
Well, what happened, I'm going to give you a history because I've been in this game for such a long time in the capital markets. When the GLD came out, that is the gold bullion ETF, the regulatory world prior to that was very negative on gold stocks. And I would go through my normal SEC audits, just find that they just didn't like the industry. After the GLD, it changed. The narrative changed. And you saw the separation between gold and gold stocks. So a lot of the better performing gold stocks did accelerate, but most of them were not really good business models. And gold has far outperformed this century gold stocks and outperformed the S&P 500. So now this year in the Bitcoin ecosystem, there's Bitcoin ETFs, which have had explosive growth. And I believe that going forward, we'll see a separation of those Bitcoin mining companies that do not run on a high cash flow return on invested capital model, that they will start to waver and there'll be a disenfranchise. That's what I believe can happen again. But in that interim, what has happened in America is there was only, I mentioned Hive was first, and now there's more than 24 crypto mining companies. If your home base is in America, not Canada, not the UK, but your home address is in America, then you can qualify for being in the Russell 2000 or the S&P microcap indexes. And there's trillions of dollars indexed in America. And not only is it the biggest ecosystem for ETFs and mutual funds and hedge funds, etc., a lot of the pension funds have indexing models. So what do we see this year with the launch of the Bitcoin ETF has been more Bitcoin miners going into these indexes being approved to go in. So the largest shareholders of Marathon are indexes. The HUD-8 jumped 80%, had nothing to do with what they do. They use more energy than we do, and they produce less Bitcoin than we do, and they have a bigger market cap than we do. And that has to do with just capital market structure of being listed in the U.S. So Hive has been public when we were exploring that, where we moved the head office to the U.S. And going through that process, we'd have to change accounting from what's called IFRS, which is in the UK. We would have to change it to GAAP, not GAAP genes, but general accounting, except the principles, basically. And we're in that motion, and we've started to present our financials in unaudited GAAP format so that you really can compare how depreciation expenses are on that relative basis. So what really has happened is that Hive has the best value proposition when you look at market cap to exahash, market cap to Bitcoin produced. Hive clearly is the best value proposition that's out there.
Okay, so and then you are in the process to exploring getting a US address.
They call it redomiciling. HUD-8 redomiciled from Toronto to Miami. And then it took 12 months, and then they went into the Russell 2000. And then that's when all of a sudden the world started to change dramatically. The other big part has been in the capital markets was this bought deal, they call it in Canada, but in particular in the US, has been the convertible marketplace. And it's a very sophisticated market, and it's hard to explain to the retail person, but it relates to the growth in ETFs. So the growth in ETFs in a nanosecond, brokers can see how many securities can they borrow, say, of CleanSpark. And they say from all the ETFs and all those indexes, which have low fees, they'll pay us 20 basis points for us to borrow the stock. We'll borrow the stock and we'll short it right away. And then we'll turn around and give the company money in a convertible debenture. And that's what MicroStrategy has done. So now all of a sudden, you just get this volume that goes back and forth. And the more volume you get, then the more liquidity you create. It makes it easier mechanism. So then MicroStrategy is the best example. All of a sudden, the ETFs at 2 times MicroStrategy stock. Well, all of a sudden, people are trading that. They're borrowing against the ETF stock. Then they're borrowing here. Then they reposition. So this liquidity cycle is ferocious. But what people should really be aware of is that on those notes that you have to, they say it's 100% premium. It's not free. You have to take the proceeds of your money and buy a put and call with the broker and they make a fee on top of the commission they charge. So I was told the other day that a $400 million deal was done, and almost $200 million was used to buy puts and calls around that $400 million note. So the company really only got about $250 million. And so you have to recognize that what is going on. So a lot of these companies now are out there floating $500 million to buy more Bitcoin. They're putting more debt on their balance sheet because the cost is cheap. But what they've created now is a big short position against their stock. And so how long will it take for that to digest? It's complex. I love that it's because it's complex and fascinating, but nothing as complex and fascinating as the algorithm which Satoshi created for Bitcoin. That is like Mozart's Jupiter Symphony.
Yeah, it's very interesting, all these dynamics that really counts. But as you said, the retail investors don't really know what's actually going on. So another thing that I think is very interesting is how miners has changed from just being a Bitcoin play for traditional investors to actually become key energy powerhouse. They are very important for building this resilient energy infrastructure for the future. So do you think analysts and investors are actually now grasping that, are understanding the role the miners are playing? They are not just the Bitcoin.
Well, I don't really think so to the degree that you would expect. But I think it will evolve. Like adoption of Bitcoin around the world, it will evolve. We're in a very still early innings of that evolution. Over the next 4 years, it will be a game changer. I think that we're witnessing a phenomenon that President-to-be Trump was just in France, and Elon Musk was with them on the whole AI world. And then all of a sudden he flies back to South Texas to watch the launch of rockets going into space by Elon. This is a new world. This is, I hope that this wakes up what's taking place in Europe of the far left, which I believe all started with the Frankfurt School in the 60s of the sort of changing the words of communism to create disruptions in Europe. And then it grew over here. I think we could be at an epic transformation period that little things happen, which you may not relate directly to Bitcoin, but I do in my sort of research, such as the puberty blockers being blocked in the UK. I would speculate that this all started in the 60s, and a lot of these other BLM, all these things are to disrupt Europe, to disrupt America. And how did we have open borders in 80 countries? We're flying people into Mexico to come across our border. Who flew them? You think North Africa swam across the Mediterranean to Sicily? No. Someone put them on speedboats. Do you think that they came across from Holland over to England? Do you think they came from China? Something like Homeland Security is arrested from 80 countries. So what does that do? Well, that's an old socialist model to disrupt a vibrant society that believes in private property rights, which is Bitcoin, which believes in human rights versus being centrally controlled. So when I see these little things happen, like I said, I believe that they're related, and it's very positive that Trump is not the president, but he's flying back and forth as he is. And now they're going to take, with these large language models and AI, and take 70,000 regulations of 170,000 pages or whatever the number is, and run it through AI and see how they can cancel a lot of them and streamline them. So there's so many of them are redundant and overlapping, and they're causing traffic jams. How do they create faster flowing roundabouts in London rather than everything stopping and going and speed bumps everywhere to get it to flow? I think we're going through this great digital transformation in governments. So it's extremely bullish for the Bitcoin ecosystem. I noticed that a year ago, there was like 18,000 nodes validating the Bitcoin ecosystem all around the world. And now there's over 20,000. So that's growing like the adoption of Bitcoin. And that makes, very, very bullish. I saw that more companies and brokers are getting into stablecoin business because the immense success of Tether. I mean, now they're at $145 billion. I just came back from Paraguay looking at other operations, and Who is there that's using facilities? Is Tether and other crypto mining companies. So I just see that this transformation will evolve. It'll have pullbacks and setbacks like it normally will, but it's very bullish.
And it's very interesting, this relationship, which is kind of hate and love between the dollar and Bitcoin. Because like you mentioned about Tether, and really the stablecoin is actually promoting dollarization in a way because they buy treasury bills. So it's quite interesting to see, from one side, you think Bitcoin want to be the new dollar, but it's not actually what is happening. So it's definitely fascinating.
You know what's really important for people to realize about Bitcoin and what the U.S. Constitution is? It's all about a balancing of power. And the balancing the power of you as a person and the balancing of the government that is overseeing from a macro point of view. We have the administration, the White House, and you have Congress, and you have the Senate, and you have the sort of balancing of the power, and there's a dispute, it goes to the Supreme Court. So you have this unique, this state power you don't have in Europe, where the states of, say, the UK or Italy have so much economic power it's all centrally controlled. That mechanism here, what they realize is to stop overreaching federal governments, is to have human rights as connected to private property rights. And that you saw in Argentina coming back, I mentioned earlier in 2002, it was so oppressive to take away your US dollar accounts. And the only reason why Argentina is Buenos Aires is a magnificent city and functions because there's $25 billion of US dollars cash that keeps that economy going, and the oppression. So a Tether comes along and says, you can have US dollars in a digital format, and they grow to 300 million users and $145 billion with US dollars behind it. So it tells you that people recognize the importance of that freedom of my money. And so if individuals have their wealth protected from banks that are hooked with governments to the degree that they're oppressive, then they're safe, they're protected. I think that we're going to see a swing to that balance of power.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Now let's go back to to AI, because you build AI data center, and I'm curious to know what kind of returns can investor expect from AI data center versus traditional, Bitcoin mining operations.
Well, before we go into that, it's interesting, in Sweden, like many of the government agencies and people, they think their mobile phone, it just functions free. They think that Spotify just functions. And the wake-up call is there is no Spotify, and there's no war games, and there's no gaming without data centers. Bitcoin functions because of data centers. The digital realm that we live in is all based on data centers and electricity. So they're quite significant. And so when you look at data centers, and they come basically in 4 tiers of sophistication and redundancy, they call it. But Bitcoin is very basic. So I try to explain to people that 1 megawatt of electricity, you have to do a guesstimation in your brain, is $1 million of infrastructure spending. But when you go to HPC for AI, it's 10 million. It's 10 times more infrastructure spending. The reason for that is that Hive was the first to balance the grid. So we can go from 30 megawatts to 3 megawatts in 15 seconds. We don't have to worry when it gets cold or hot outside, we can balance the grid. But when AI is functioning and someone is flying an airplane or surgeons working, they have to be up all the time. It has to function. So you can't have that downtime. And if something does go wrong, you need to have backup. So the reason why HPC data centers cost so much more is you have to have big batteries. You have to have big, almost diesel storage electricity so that the machines are always working for the surgeon that's operating on you. And it's recognizing those differences of needs, recognizing the cost differential. And what happens is that the profit margin in AI is more stable. You can enter in, but it's a B2C market. So you have to go get a hospital or university or government agency or the Royal Bank of Scotland that wants to use your data center, and they'll go into a 4-year agreement for using your chips etc. That's a longer term agreement that you can do a better guesstimation of your profit margin. So they trade at much higher multiples on an EBITDA basis versus Bitcoin mining. The margins go up and down because Bitcoin can be falling, but the difficulty is still up, and the difficulty has to fall, they call it, before your margin comes back. So you get this sort of seesaw, if you like trigonometry, cosine sine wave happening, or DNA movement that is much more challenging for financial modeling unless you are a big believer that Bitcoin's just going to trade higher over the next 30 years like Michael Saylor. If you believe that, then you will always come back to a profit margin. But as soon as you come back to a profit margin, in comes new machines, comes more miners to take a piece of that every 10 minutes opportunity to mine Bitcoin.
So it sounds that really you need to be very efficient in order to be able to manage all these different kind of operations where, you know, the Bitcoin mining is quite challenging. Then you have the AI that is more like a stable, high margin business. But there is also the thing that you really need to have a good way to sell out these AI compute as well. So it's
the big thing is going to be big thing is going to be energy. And you've seen some big game changers happen this year. In March, AWS, owned by Amazon, their highest profit margin, bought nuclear energy, almost a gigawatt of electricity for $650 million. All the climate change fanatics, all the greenies, there was zip the lip. There was no protest, no complaints. And now there's a big push for small nuclear energy. So we are seeing a change, and in Europe it's different because Germany shut everything down and they have an energy crisis and they're way behind on the curve of the AI creation, but it will catch up. It will make changes. It's just now behind in its productivity. But I think that we're seeing the source of electricity is going to become very valuable. And what's first people to go there is Bitcoin miners, like Paraguay or now Ethiopia. Europe built these dams with the IMF and banks and World Bank in Ethiopia, but there's no infrastructure to take it to the villages. It's amazing. They have all this capacity going nowhere. So all along comes Bitcoin miners, and they're part of the stack table with the government, and voila, they're taking that cash flow and they're starting building more power lines, more substations. And Bitmain is over there in a big way. Tether's, I believe, also in Ethiopia. So you're going to see these emerging countries which have this locked up energy, or like Paraguay has been selling electricity to Argentina and has no pay or slow pay. But when Bitcoin miners are there, they get paid every month in US dollars. So all the Latin currencies are falling against US dollar, but their banks cannot hedge their foreign currency the way we are basically a foreign currency hedge for them. So we are part of that transformation to help emerging economies. And that's very positive, to recognize that it's, if you think of a do good and humanitarian reasons, you can all of a sudden electrify Africa. You can electrify especially the eastern countries of Africa and throughout Latin America.
From a geopolitical power perspective, how important is where those data centers are located?
Well, I'm a big believer that even if you come to the state of Texas, you have to know who the county commissioner is. You have to know the locals. You have to have an ESG strategy, but you don't have to call it ESG, but you have to be involved with your community besides being involved with the government. So going to a country like Paraguay, I met first time with the president. And then last week I was there with Aydin Kilic, our CEO, and we met with the head of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. What was interesting for me is that both of these political party leaders are very pro-Bitcoin. The president of the country, he went to the University of Columbia, is in America, worked for the IMF. He's very waiting for the choke, they call it choke point 2.0, with the overreach of the federal agencies of using banks to go after and say they wouldn't allow banking to happen in other countries if they had Bitcoin mining. I think that he will change his tune in the next 6 months as the banks in New York all of a sudden stop this sort of dragnet against Bitcoin globally. I remain very positive towards it, but going in, you have to know the political leaders. You have to know the governor. We got a helicopter, and we went and flew to see the governor of where we are. And we find out that they have electricity in Paraguay, and they have, in this one little area we are, the governor says he has 400 schools, 75,000 students, but the electrical hookup between the grid and the schools where there's air conditioning has not been done.
Yeah.
Like, so what do? We immediately start 10 schools all around where we are. Before we even start mining, we are going to electrify those schools' air conditioning so that those kids can get a good education. And so that's how we function at Hive. We're different. We're green. We're very much involved in our communities. And I think we're going to maintain that sort of spirit of core of what we're doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really nice. You come to a country not just to use the resources, but to be a partner, to be a friend, to help them. I think that's, is ethically great. And it's part of the ESG, right? That's what ESG is about. It's not just environmental. But tell me a bit about the new machine, because I know that Paraguay is quite challenging because it's hot, but it's humid. It's kind of like Italy, where I'm from. It's not the same, but, I kind of get the concept.
So we went and visited several properties of our peers in Paraguay and went on a learning curve of what machines are working, which ones don't. Had the ability to go in and see many different facilities. And clearly the Hydra machine is the most efficient machine, that unit. But what we discover is that there's some iterations that have taken place where engineers have changed their water coolant systems. Immersion clearly is probably the best way to go. I would think, to deal with that weather. Because it's hot and it's humid, it creates a uniqueness to it that if you want to be really efficient. And that was the big part, because Hive really takes great pride that we function in 9 time zones, 5 languages, and we are always in the top most efficient crypto miners in the world, and with that small group. And so with that, we want to make sure that we could carry on that high efficiency in the country. So we made some changes into our engineering, and we're very excited about the opportunities in the country.
Last question. Where do you see Hive in 5 years?
I know that our recent press release about the new chips and what we made the commitment. So the big part is that we said that we now have electricity for 15 exahash, and that will give the goal we've always had to get 2% of the global network. So we feel that that's a very worthy goal by the summer. But then people automatically start to doubt you, and where's your machines? So now we purchased the order. We've sent millions and tens of millions of dollars for those machines to be coming in. And so it's very much like a straight line to the summer to get to 15 exahash. So based on that, Stifel's analyst came out and said that they value us at $10 a share. I think that if you took out our Bitcoin holder position of almost $300 million worth of Bitcoin, if you took that out, we trade around 50 million per exahash, and the other crypto mining companies in the U.S., which are U.S. based, they're trading at 200 million. So I think that we have, on a relative basis, a 4 times catch up to be on their level, and we are still more efficient miners than those. So I think there's lots of potential for the upside over the next 6 months.
Yeah, in the making of building $1 billion company. Thank you, Frank, for coming on the show.
Ho, ho, ho! And Merry Christmas and happy holidays to you and all your listeners.
Thank you.